Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Localizing Climate Justice Conference Nature-Based Solutions panel. My name is Vishal Jamalapati. I am the lead organizer of the LCJC series and a co-founder of the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration. I'm calling in live from the unceded lands of the Eastern Shoshone and Goshute peoples in what is now known as Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States. This event is the second in the LCJC series. And thank you to those of you who joined us in September for the series launch. You can access the recording for our first event on our YouTube channel or on our website. Whether you're tuning in live or watching a recording today, thank you for taking the next 2 hours out of your busy schedules to join us. I'd like to also show my deep gratitude to the LCJC series co-sponsoring organizations for their continued support and dedication to climate justice. And finally, I'd like to thank our 6 amazing speakers today for volunteering their time to enlighten us all about nature-based solutions and their work with indigenous voices and indigenous activism in the climate space. Over the next 2 hours, you'll hear presentations from each of our diverse speakers about their work and involvement with nature-based solutions. There will be a 30-minute question and answer session following immediately. So please feel free to leave any comments, thoughts, or questions you may have throughout the event in our Facebook and YouTube live chats. We have GYCAD core team members monitoring, and we'll be bringing those questions up for the Q&A. This is a dialogue event, and it's meant to incite productive discussion between you, the audience, and the speakers on this panel today. The LCJC series aims to connect a diverse array of youth activists, climate experts, and policymakers to ensure that our frustration at the current global state of climate affairs is justified through concrete political action. As indigenous communities face further hardships, the planet burns, and ecosystems are continually destroyed, understanding the importance of nature-based solutions as a method of resilient recovery and mitigation is more crucial than ever. We would like to extend a warm congratulations to the plethora of newly elected and appointed indigenous policymakers here in the United States this past election cycle, because every step towards holistic justice for all is equally important and impactful. We must recognize indigenous communities and the significant role they play in our response to a changing climate. We must base our policy on empirical scientific evidence. We must empower our women and girls with education and leadership, and we must make equity and justice the center of all climate discussions. My hope is that this panel, through collaborative and intergenerational dialogue, will bring us collectively just a little bit closer to each of those goals. Following the conclusion of the question and answer session, we will adjourn this panel's live stream and open our GYCAD revision Zoom room to allow attendees to network and continue this discussion on a more informal and personal level if they so wish. My colleague Nadine Clopton will discuss the revision in further detail. Please direct any logistical questions to either YouTube or Facebook live chats throughout the event. As I said, we have GYCAD core team members monitoring those. And without any further ado, let's get started. The LCJC series Nature-Based Solutions panel is officially now in session. And with that, it is my great honor to introduce my esteemed colleague, Nadine Clopton. I've had the greatest privilege of working alongside Nadine since the inception of the GYCAD in 2019, and have been nothing but inspired and recommitted to the fight for climate justice by her fearless leadership and youth advocacy. Nadine Clopton became a director on the Global NGO Executive Committee at just 21 years old, the youngest person to ever serve in this capacity. On the committee, she is chair of the Intergenerational Subcommittee. Nadine is an innovative change maker determined to amplify the voices of communities and ecosystems that are often excluded from decision-making bodies. She co-founded and co-authored the Global Youth Climate Action Declaration, a set of 77 climate policy recommendations that were crafted through a consultative process with youth climate activists, and she'll talk a little more about the GYCAD. She's currently leading the GYCAD core team's strategic development initiatives. For the past 5 years, she has served as the youth representative to the United Nations for the Australia-based NGO Caring and Living as Neighbors, an NGO dedicated to catalyzing better health outcomes for children with chronic conditions in Indigenous communities and resource-poor settings. This past spring, Nadine completed her master's in environmental policy at Lehigh University as a presidential scholar, devoting both her studies and advocacy work to just sustainable development. Outside of her advocacy efforts, Nadine is a classically trained opera singer, plays the ukulele, and loves spending time in nature. Nadine, I will pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Vishal. I'm like blushing now. Thank you for the intro, for all your hard work in putting this conference together, and for being our tech wizard. And a massive congrats on your recent acceptance to Georgetown. Watch out, everyone. He's going to change the world. So hello, dear friends, colleagues, and audience members. Thank you for your presence at this second event in our Localizing Climate Justice Conference series. We are so glad that you could join us, whether you're listening to this event live or to the replay later on. Today's theme is nature-based solutions, which is my personal favorite from the GYCAD and climate discourse in general. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging that I'm calling in today from unceded Lenni Lenape land. I honor the ancestors, past, present, and future, whose roots are intertwined with the land beneath my feet, and I invite you to join me in taking a brief moment to honor the beings who are connected to wherever you may be. The GYCAD, which stands for Global Youth Climate Action Declaration, is a set of 77 key climate policy action items, co-created, defined, and refined by young climate activists from around the globe. The intention of the GYCAD is to serve both as a knowledge platform and as a climate policy toolkit that empowers people to make climate action a tangible reality in their home communities. Nature-based solutions is one of the 10 sections of the GYCAD and perhaps one of the most consistently overlooked in policymaking. It honors the intrinsic value of Mother Earth and looks to her for guidance on how to approach some of the seemingly insurmountable challenges we are collectively facing. Nature-based solutions implies that the remedy to many of the issues we face today can be observed in the Earth's natural processes and ecosystem services. It allows us to understand the root causes of issues related to climate change and how we can better support Earth's natural mechanisms to reverse the catastrophic impacts we are watching unfold before us. Indigenous people and those who live in a deep reciprocal relationship with Mother Earth hold the keys to unlocking a more just and sustainable future. Here in the US, as Vishal shared earlier, we're celebrating the monumental step towards a brighter Indigenous-led future, with Congresswoman Deb Haaland being appointed as Secretary of the Interior, the first ever Indigenous member of the presidential cabinet. As non-Indigenous climate activists like myself, it is our duty to listen deeply, to advocate for the protection of these earth protectors through better policymaking, reparations, and the provision of real, meaningful justice, to offer ourselves in service to the planet we all call home and to all the beings part of our ecosystem. In sharing the stories of our panelists today, some of whom are Indigenous youth, I might add, we hope that you are inspired to look deeply at your personal relationship to Mother Earth and contemplate how you can be even a better caretaker and contribute to creating a more just, sustainable future for all of us and the generations to come. The GYCAD core team, consisting of myself, Vishal, Arpan, Aishu, Annie, Zahara, and Rogers, serve as the custodians and caretakers of this document. We seek to uphold the GYCAD's intended purpose as a living intersectional policy document that is owned not by any of us individually, but belongs to everyone as the collective youth voice on climate policy reform. In keeping with our role as custodians of this living document, following our panel today, we'd like to invite you to join us on a Zoom call where we formally open the 2020 to 2021 GYCAD revision process. At this event, you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts and feedback on the GYCAD. We would love for your voice to be heard and amplified in the next generation of the document. Please keep an eye on the comment sections of the YouTube Live or Facebook Live for call-in details after our panel and Q&A session. And if you're unable to join us at this live revision, we have a Google form where you can contribute your input to the revision process and make sure that your voice is heard. So without further ado, it's my honor to kick off our nature-based solutions panel and to introduce the first of our many, many inspiring speakers today. Sensei Aaron Hoops is the author of Reconnecting to the Earth, reclaiming our connection to nature and ourselves. He has spent his life cultivating a connection with the natural world and understands that people who care for their bodies and cultivate their minds are able to tune into nature more effectively. His other books include Perfecting Ourselves, Coordinating Body, Mind, and Spirit, and Zen Yoga, A Path to Enlightenment Through Breathing, Movement, and Meditation. He is a martial arts instructor with over 40 years of training and runs the Dragon Mountain Kung Fu School for children in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Without further ado, Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Nadine. It's wonderful to be a part of this program today. And I thought I would start with a poem that is part of my book, Reconnecting to the Earth. Maybe if we could all just close our eyes and listen for a few moments here. This is called Wake Up Calling. Wake up calling. Humanity rages, destruction in stages of everything under the sun. The birds and the bees, the rivers and trees, it seems like the end has begun. A population of people turned into sheeple, conditioned to crave more and more. Life based on greed, want, desire, and need leads to nothing but war. The planet is dying, the animals crying, the forests all being cut down. The climate is hot, except when it's not, and some say we're all going to drown. We eat poison foods, take meds for our moods. We're so ill we cannot take action. To keep us asleep, the tendrils run deep with all manners of lies and distraction. We cut the tops off the hills, down below oil spills. For us to progress, it is said. It's hard not to believe if we do not grieve. Soon we all will be dead. Living in fear, something is near. Now we're all scared to death. Chaos and change can often feel strange, so please just take a deep breath. What can we do, just me and you, to turn this whole thing around? One way to recall our connection to all is to put our bare feet on the ground. Now feel the earth. Remember its worth. Let the energy run through your soul. Look deep in your heart. That's where you start to connect yourself to the whole. This cannot be solved if you don't get involved. Start now. There's no time to wait. Change how you're living. Stop taking. Start giving. Please, before it's too late. And so there you are. If you've made it this far, 3 last things I will say, if I may. Begin with a bow. Stay here in the now. And remember to breathe every day. And so I think what I'd like to speak about is those last 3 things are basically what my work is all about. And the first one being begin with a bow. And most Eastern traditions start with some sort of bow in a form of showing respect for whoever it is that we bow to. And when we bow to the earth, it's really about making our relationship to the earth, honoring the sacredness of nature and Mother Earth. And we want to cultivate this relationship because what bowing to the earth does, it cultivates, it enhances the reciprocity, the mutual exchange, the give and take. We seem to be a world of taking, and we take everything we can from this planet, and the planet is so loving and giving. It gives us everything that we need. But there has to be a reciprocity. There has to be a giving back, a returning of from us back to the planet, of care, of thoughts, of love. And if if we can start with that, which the bow symbolizes that, and it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking and being, then we can start on this path. And that leads us to the next one, which is stay here in the now, which is about being in the present moment. There's the ancient Chinese saying that says, if you want to change the world, you have to change the state. And if you want to change the state, well, you have to change the family. And if you want to change the family, well, you have to start with the individual. And it really starts with, we have to start by changing or correcting ourselves. And that means taking responsibility and owning what's ours. Staying present is really about maintaining balance in your daily life and showing up for what's important. If you spend any time in nature, you really understand that nature lives in the present moment. Nature's the tree out there is not concerned about the past. It's not wondering about the future. It's living in the present moment. All the animals, all the plants, everything in nature lives in the present moment. And in order for us to really be in a deep relationship with nature, we have to be present when we are in nature, because nature's in the present moment. And if we're out in nature, but we're all distracted with our phones or with whatever it is, we're not on the same vibration, on the same wavelength as nature. And so it's really, really important for us to learn how to stay present and maintain our balance in nature. And so the third one that I at the end of the poem is remember to breathe every day, which encompasses the practice of being present. If you have any understanding about breathing exercises or breath work or yoga or any of these practices that teach breathing, you understand that breathing is a fundamental action of our physical body. It's something we do all day, every day throughout our life. But it can be very unconscious. If you're not thinking about breathing, you still breathe. You take in the oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. However, when we learn to breathe consciously by connecting our mind to the breath and connecting our body to the breath, we enhance the practice of breathing, the quality of the oxygen, the ability to bring in more oxygen and energy to convert that into what we need to go through the body to clean it out, to make us healthy and strong and vibrant, really happens when we're doing conscious breathing. The unconscious breathing is kind of subsistence enough to keep us alive and moving along, but the conscious, deep, intentional breathing is what gives us the energy to really advance and make progress in our life. And the same goes for when we're outside in nature, because if we are connected to ourselves and breathing, deep conscious breathing, if you're thinking about the breathing and your body is breathing, that's a connection between your mind and body. Your mind is present, your body is present, and that is being in the present moment. Breathing, conscious breathing, is one of the best ways to be in that moment. And so when we can go outside into nature and immerse ourselves in nature and practice this deep breathing, then what that does is that connects you to nature in the present moment. And we're going to hear a lot of things from a lot of the other wonderful speakers, and breathing may seem like a very simple or easy thing to do, but it's one of the most basic things we can do to start this process of finding solutions to what's going on with the planet and helping us all get somewhere. We all need to work on ourselves and then bring our best self to the table to help this process along. And it starts with deep breathing. It sounds very simple, but it can be an absolutely wonderful practice for all of us to get where we need to go. So I think I will leave it there. I thank you so much for inviting me on this program, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for sharing that beautiful poem with us. I'm sure everyone who's listening right now or at the replay later is really deeply moved, as I know I am. And so with that being said, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Atia Khatibi. Atia Khatibi is an environmental activist who has a bachelor's and master's degree in environmental science engineering from the University of Tehran. She has worked on review of the role of institutions in determining policy priorities for the sustainable management of wetlands, with the approach of wise use in one of the wetlands in the south of Iran for her master's thesis. She's interested in working on interdisciplinary areas related to environmental and legal issues. In this regard, she's worked on the policymaking for sustainable management of one of the south of Iran's wetlands, focusing on local institutions. Due to her interest in legal issues, she has recently obtained her second master's degree in environmental law and is currently pursuing a bachelor's of law. Her research interests are environmental law, climate change adaptation, and nature-based solutions. She has worked as an intern at UNIC, which is the United Nations Information Center, and UNDP, the UN Development Program, working as an assistant member in the Climate Change Vulnerability of Wetlands Project. She is the founding member of Atazis, which is a national NGO, and advocates on behalf of youth and women and mobilization through education. Recently, she got a fellowship and worked as a project assistant in the Adelphi organization, the climate change department in Berlin. She is a member of different working groups such as Jungo and the adaptation working group being one of them. So without further ado, I will let Atia share her story with us.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you based on your locations. I'm so happy to be here, and I would like to share my experiences with all of you, and looking forward to having a discussion at the Q&A session later on. As all of us know, anthropogenic climate change is affecting and is causing effects from different aspects, such as sea level rise, increased climate variability, and increased climate vulnerability. And we cannot ignore the social impacts of climate change and economic consequences of climate change, especially on the local people who are living in the remote areas, and they tend to be most vulnerable to climate change. Among the range of proposed climate actions, such as energy saving, local public transportation, developing renewable energies, or technological improvements, the ways provided by nature are often overlooked or underestimated by policymakers and decision makers, unfortunately. Ecosystem can play a really important role to make a basis for life through multi functions, ranging from climate regulation, agriculture and fishing, and many other resources for local people. The ecosystem services and the ecosystem should adapt to climate change and should adapt to long-term changing in temperature and rainfall patterns. But they can do this only if they are stable, if the ecosystem are stable and healthy. In this case, they can adapt to climate change. Nature-based solutions are the approaches to work and enhance the nature to provide some local livelihood and wetland and ecosystem services for the local people who are living in the local area. One of the, nature-based climate change mitigation solutions, the ecosystem services are provided to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions. In nature-based climate change adaptation solutions, the ecosystem services are provided And the goal is to preserve the ecosystem services and to reduce the negative impacts of climate change. So the nature-based solution, at the same time, we can conserve the ecosystem, and also we can protect the ecosystem services, and we can address the social and economic consequences of climate change. Many projects and initiatives have been conducted around the globe to use the nature-based solutions and to address the climate change and increasing the climate resilience. And I have worked on one of the wetlands in south of Iran. And this wetland is one of the Ramsar sites where it's located in the south of Iran. And the local people depends on this wetland for fishing, for agriculture, for example, for harvesting vegetation. We're growing around the wetland. And so this wetland is really important for them because their livelihood depends on this wetland. So I focus on the local institutions to prioritize policy making for sustainable wetland management. So at the same time, we can conserve the wetlands, so we can protect the ecosystem services, and also we can overcome and address the social and economic challenges that the local people are dealing with the climate change impacts. Some local institutions are related to the 5 categories of capital livelihood. We have 5 capital livelihood capitals. One of them is natural capital, and which reflects the capital of a stock as a result of resources flows and useful services for the human well-being in the nature. The other one is human capital, which includes skills, abilities, and knowledge of the local people to design a better livelihood strategies. The other one is social capital, which includes social behavioral pattern, such as cooperation among families, or, for example, distributing tasks between local people in taking climate action steps. The other one is physical capital, which includes the basic infrastructure, and finally the last one is financial capitals. In this research, I focus on local institutions to prioritize the policy for sustainable wetland management. When we focus on the local institutions, because we have governmental institutions and local institutions. What are the local institutions? Local institutions include some traditions, some customs, some traditional and religious ceremonies among local people, or cooperation between local people, or even distributing tasks for taking climate actions. So all of these are local institutions. And if we focus on the local institutions, the output policies would be more practical, because the local community have participated in the decision-making and policy-making process already. And that's the nature-based solution that we're looking for. We would like to conserve the wetland, we would like to protect the ecosystem services, and at the end, we would like to overcome the social and economic consequences of climate change, especially we would like to increase the climate change resilience, and climate change adaptation. So in my research, I focus on local institutions, and I want to clarify it for you to understand what are the local institutions and how we can focus on local institutions in nature-based solutions. Because while focusing and considering on local institutions during the policy-making process, we can achieve the policies that is consider climate justice, and the policies that include both gender in decision-making process, and we can meet the climate change adaptation. In my research, there are some local institutions, and I would like to make an example for you to understand it better. For example, in the fishing sector, in the fishing ecosystem services of the wetland that I have worked for my master's thesis, I realized that there are some local institutions among fishers. For example, they don't fish on some special days during the whole month, or they don't fish in some special days across the year to prevent overfishing. Because one of the negative impacts of climate change in this wetland is the frequency of drought, and they are facing with a lack of water, and they are facing with a decreased number of the fish storage. So they have to overcome this challenge. So they set some limitations themselves. The local people set some limitations themselves for fishing. For example, they limit the number of the nets applying for fishing up to 20 nets, rather than using some electronic devices, which can lead to overfishing. So if they want to decrease the pressure of this climate change on the wetland, they have to set some traditions among themselves. And one of them is that they limit the number of nets using in fishing, and also they decrease the number of hours of fishing during a day. So many of the local people can access to fishing, and at the same time they can conserve the wetland, and they can overcome the economic consequences, especially which is stronger according to climate change effects. Or the other example that I have realized in this wetland is that in warmer season, the local people cooperate together. I mean, instead of fishing one by one, and instead of fishing by each of the families, all of the local families gather together, and they create local community, and then they go for fishing and distribute the fish species among all the households, so they can decrease the pressure of climate change impacts, and they can overcome these consequences. And that's the nature-based solutions. Or men go for fishing and women go for selling the fish around the urban areas, and they could involve all of the people and all of the gender in taking climate action steps. And that's the point. We have to look for some local institutions like these that we can find in agriculture sector, in fishing, or even for harvesting vegetation around the wetland, for example, for making some handicrafts. And when we include these local institutions in nature-based solution and in policy making, we can achieve climate justice. And when we focus on local institutions and in nature-based solution, we can develop some local legislation that could be more practical at the local level. As all of you know that the well-designed policy, which can implement it at the local level, can strengthen the capabilities and capacities of local people, and they can overcome the climate change impacts. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to have a good discussion later. And maybe you have some question that I can answer you, and I can speak more on my research outputs, and especially with the focus on local institutions and the role in policy making.
Thank you for sharing, Atia. It was really, really enlightening to hear about your work and how local institutions can play into better policy making. So for our next speaker, we will go to Anthony Ramon Perez Soto. Tony is a young activist from Punta Arenas, Costa Rica. He descends from the Jorotega and Huetar indigenous groups in Costa Rica. Tony's family is immersed in a matrilineal model, which has prompted him to question gender inequalities from a very early age, given that his national context tends to favor men over women. Tony is currently pursuing a master's degree at DePaul University in Chicago in applied diplomacy with a concentration on migration. He recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science and German from Luther College in Iowa. Passionate about decolonizing academic and policymaking structures, Tony got heavily involved in building a new academic curriculum for Luther College. Some of those efforts included mobilizing students, organizing public forums, and petitioning directly to the Reforming Committee to include a variety of content focusing on Black and Brown experiences and contributions, from science and history to physical education. In his years of college, Tony led the International Student and Allies Association and Latinas Unidas, a student organization focusing on the authentic Latinx experience in the US and abroad. In those achievements, he sought to create a stronger sense of community while challenging the white structures of power in this context. Tony was a keynote speaker at the second Decorah Pride Parade in 2019 and has participated in a variety of panel conversations focusing on decolonization efforts, including an event for earthhacks.io, which featured youth leaders from Earth Guardians. Tony is fluent in Spanish, English, German, and Italian. Wow. His enrichment by and grasp of language has been possible due to his interest in working with immigrant communities in Germany, Italy, the Dominican Republic, Postville, Iowa, Tucson, and Nogales, Arizona. His work in this field ranges from assisting nutrition departments to translation services for asylum and refugee populations. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to hear from you. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nadine, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, everybody, and as well as the speakers who have gone through prior to my turn right now. And thank you, everybody who is watching this event. I'm really happy to be part of this. And as I think I would like to touch upon a few things about my personal background and also my experience as an activist and community organizer. And I think as it was said, I do descend from two indigenous groups in Costa Rica. And so that has played an important role in the activism and the education and the activities that I have engaged in, and also the causes that I support. I think that when we speak about nature-based solutions, we need to speak about indigenous communities, and we need to speak about people's First Nations. And I think that is very important, because a lot of the times when we think, for example, about climate change, when we think about alternatives for agriculture, alternatives for water use, or other type of issues that are pertaining to climate change, we tend to forget how indigenous peoples or people who were there prior to civilizations, were working, or like how they were organizing, how things were going. And I want to say as well that when we speak about climate change and we think about, okay, how are we going to tackle climate change? How are we going to to become more resilient when it comes about climate? We need to include also indigenous people. We need to make sure that we not only include their practices, but we also include their voices. And I think that a lot of this is very linked to politics, and also in the way that our policies are made. I can speak for the Costa Rican context in that there is not as much political representation when it comes to indigenous people, when it comes to indigenous groups. When decisions are being made at Parliament, that voice, that perspective is not there. And I cannot express how important that is. I find great, that there is that type of leadership in the US, like more and more, and that more should be, right? I mean, it is certainly not the final achievement when we speak about somebody being part of the government cabinet who is a Native American woman, right? Like, that is a great achievement, yes, but we'll need to keep voting for people. We'll need to keep organizing communities, organizing with the communities there, and say, hey, what's going on? Like, how can we support? Like, where do you want to go with your voice? In that, many of the times when we speak about politics and about elections, about voting, about election systems, people, are discriminated against because of their identity. They are discriminated against because of their race, their ethnicity. And so that is what I would also, from my perspective, call a nature-based solution. I think that something that I'm also exploring at the moment, and that I would like to focus more on, is that connection about migration and climate change. So a lot of my experience in migration and refugees and asylum seekers, it's really been through the lenses of political persecution. Therefore, that's also why I study political science. But as we become more interconnected, we see as well that a lot of that migration flow is impacted by climate change, right? So when we talk a lot about nature solutions, okay, so how much attention am I giving to migration patterns, to migration causes? How is that related to climate change? How is the school that I'm going to debating those issues? How are we learning about those issues? Are we learning at all? Am I being able to challenge the professors or the curriculum, right? This was a really crucial part of my school in Iowa. I went there for college, and when I landed there, I knew that there was little representation to studies about Latinx, studies about Native American people, about indigenous communities, about Black people, about any member of the BIPOC community, any type of study about that. It wasn't really there. Most of the literature was written and just taught by white people, right? So how are their stories, how are their personal backgrounds connected to other people's reality, right? Like when we speak about the global majority, we'll speak about people of color, right? And how are their lives being taught? How are we learning about that? And I think with that, it is really important to stay close to the nature of things, to the context of those people in a different location. And therefore, like I, along with other people, right? So I won't claim it because it wasn't my effort only. We pushed for a curriculum reform. We said, okay, the way we're learning history, the way we're learning science, the way we're learning literature, that's not the right way. That's not the stories that we need to hear, right? In a world that is so interconnected, the pandemic, right? COVID-19 has shown that, how things can just be spread, right? How interconnected the world is. So when we have that interconnection, how can we use that for the better, right? How can we connect people across, across cultures, across societies, across countries, across borders? A lot of that is really through the curriculum. For somebody in rural Iowa, how are they going to learn about somebody who lives in El Salvador, somebody who lives in Togo, right? They may not have the ability to connect with people there, or like to visit that country. But is the curriculum that we have in place, allowing them to even think about people from a different context, from a different society, from a different race, right? And so all of these fragmentations really, it's something that really calls my attention. And it is something where I focus my activism on, where I focus my work and my studies on, right? How can we bring people together, right? How much do we need that? And it is still something that I'm really trying to do. I think that things like that, right? Like, push for a better curriculum, push with your family, right? When you have friends, when you have families who may not, who may not take into consideration what climate change is, or like how that is affecting people's lives, right? Or like how my own lifestyle is affecting people's life, right? How is my consumption of goods, of food, of any other type of consumption, how is that going to impact somebody? Is the cheap price that I'm paying for something, causing somebody harm? Yeah, if I have the ability to pay a bit higher, can I do that so that somebody may be better off, right? So those are always questions that I'm asking myself. Those are questions that I'm asking through my studies, through my experience. I think that one of the most powerful experiences that I have had, it's definitely working with refugees and with asylum seekers. And I think this is particularly important for the context of the US, where migration is a really hot debated topic, and it can be very emotional. So how do we have conversations about that? Like, how do we get to say, okay, who is a US citizen, or like who is by culture an American person and who's not, right? How is somebody who has been living in the US for generations, whose family has been there for generations, maybe more American, or like maybe more rightful of anything in this country than somebody who just came, right? So I think for me, it's just been so powerful in that while I'm not a refugee, I'm not an asylum seeker, I've had the migration experience in the US, in that I went there for college as an international student. And I arrived there in August 2016, right before the presidential election that year, which was its own scenario. And so I always ask myself, like, how can we connect people? How can we bring people together? Because that's being central to my development. And I always found that through, permaculture, through environmental studies. I always found that through activities, like water walks, fundraising. How can we bring people together? I found that through celebrating Ramadan in a Christian church in Iowa, right, in rural Iowa, and I found that it may be difficult to think that people would get immediately to accept somebody else, but then I say, okay, how can we connect people with things that will affect us all, right? And climate change is always there, indigenous rights is always there. And with those communities, I always feel it is important to think, okay, when we acknowledge somebody else, it doesn't mean that by acknowledging their rights, it means that I'm going to lose something, right? It's not like a win-lose situation, It is really that if we accept the rights, we'll all be more humanized, right? We'll all be more equal. And I think that is something that has been through my mind and through the work that I do all the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. That was really, really just so incredible to witness and be part of. And I think all of us are going to take a lot away from what you've shared with us today. And best of luck on your work going forward, because I see you as someone who's going to have a tremendous impact. So thank you. And up next, another one of our Earth Guardian speakers, Esperanza Soledad Garcia, considers herself a human being first and foremost. Esperanza is an 18-year-old Chicana woman who draws inspiration from her grandparents and their work as the campesinos, the water protectors, brown berets, the botanists and survivors. Esperanza has been active in her community since high school, working with Al Frente de Lucha, YAL, Young African American and Latinx Leaders, and the International Indigenous Youth Council and Earth Guardians Youth Council. A poet and artist, Esperanza's purpose is to share her life stories to unite people of all regions and colors. Esperanza is a sustainable architecture and design student at CU Boulder and works with Designers Without Borders on campus. She has spoken at conferences and climate strikes, using her powerful voice to dismantle injustice and reclaim land sovereignty. And without further ado, I'd love to give the stage to Esperanza, and I'm so excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Oh my gosh, that intro is so funny. I don't know, I find that really funny to think to hear. I feel like I wrote it like a long time ago. But first, I'd like to thank Nadine and Vishal for putting this together and having us and gathering for the Global Climate Youth Action Declaration. I think that's very powerful and awesome that you had us here. And thank Tony for going up before me and everybody else who went up before me. So hello everybody, my name is Esperanza Soledad Garcia. My grandparents are Adela Valdez and Santos Melendez on my maternal side, on my maternal side, that's my maternal side. On my paternal side, I have Ramon and Emelinda Garcia. I just want to give them a shout out for, kind of raising me and being able to be here today. I wouldn't be here without them today. So I'm calling in from Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho lands here in Colorado, and I'm so blessed to be here today and so humbled to be here. It's an amazing opportunity to speak with all these amazing scientists and activists and martial arts instructors. It's so cool to be here with you guys. My family, my folks come from, I'm Chicana first and foremost, and a human, and my lineage consists of Nahuatl, German, and Spanish ancestors, and that's my lineage, kind of like a mutt in that way. And my family, my maternal side is from Morra, Nuevo Mexico, which is right near Sipapu, New Mexico, kind of near Taos, and I've come from there, and that's where a lot of my work and such comes from. And so I guess to kind of begin, I was raised like between in Denver and New Mexico. Between Denver and New Mexico, I had the opportunity to work with the old ways of taking care of our water there in in northern New Mexico, and that kind of meant like we have an acequia system, which basically means acequias are basically like very, very old, brought even from the Moors and the Spanish to the United States. Water systems, like you can literally make rivers run uphill if you know the knowledge and if you know how to do it right. And so that's always been an important in my life, is water and being able to connect with water, use water for crops. In my family, we raise hemp, we raise alfalfa, and, got lots of relatives who do sheep, who do cattle, who do corn, so everybody does like a little bit of everything. And it's so important in our life is water. My whole entire family revolves around water. And what is the snow math going to be this year? I hope we get good snow. I hope the Creator blesses us with clean white snow. We can use that for the summertime, and also putting out on prayers like during the summertime. You like ask the class to come back with some water for the winter, because we're gonna need it. With climate change, with drought, with wildfires, with all of this being exasperated, like it's so important to put our intention there and to ask the clouds to come back and thank the water for their presence and for them returning every year. Because I feel like as a society, we've always just forgotten what it's like to really connect with some of the basic elements in our body, which is water. We're 70% made up of water, and it's important for us to acknowledge the water and recognize that they're not just relative, but they are a relative. They are a family member, someone who looks over us and takes care of us. There's a really cool scientist named his last name is Moto. I'm pretty sure he's Japanese, and he does like water studies where he sees like if you put certain labels on water, and then like he examines them over underneath the telescope, and he finds in his studies that the water changes biologically by the label and by the word and intention and energy that you put onto the water. So I think if you're interested in that, look into Moto. It's his last name. I can't remember his first name. And yeah, water is super freaking important, y'all. Take the water when you drink it and all that. So yeah, so important is for all Black, Indigenous, Brown, Indigenous folks from across the world, from Russia to Mongolia to Japan to Morocco to Togo to Honduras. Like the Indigenous folks of this land know best how to take care of their water, of their land, of their crops. And I think that's something where I want to bring people back to, is just recognizing and realizing and remembering all that deep knowledge that we carry as human beings, and to take that. I sound like a hippie, but to take all of that and bring it back to our lives, And that kind of brought me into doing a lot of activism in my life. I was here in Denver. We're always here in Denver. We have a lot of water conflicts. I'm sure every single place on the planet right now is going through water violence, water threats, and conflict in general. There's been whole wars that started over water conflicts, and it's and I kind of, when I was younger, when I was like 16 or something, I really wanted to speak to that. I wanted to talk about what is it like when we, like I said, like when we look at these elements as not just elements and resources, but as relatives who have living being and who are like a family member and who've been here longer than we have as humans. And also when I was younger, I really wanted to talk about the real activism that really needs to happen in all of our societies. Truly a return to motherhood, it really is like a return to motherhood. Like, we've forgotten about it. Mothers are the backbone of this civilization, and our mothers are sick right now, They feel insecure, they feel like they're not worthy. And it's so important for us to come back to motherhood and that essence that we all carry within us. And I guess for my activism things that I've traveled the world doing things, I kind of got somewhere involved with architecture, and I got involved with designing and using these principles that I've been taught and have come to understand in my designs and in my architecture to try to do sustainable architecture. And that would mean using regenerative material, like using hempcrete or hemp to build walls, or adobe, which is just a mix of water, clay, and hay to make buildings that are carbon neutral, that are cooler in the summertime and insulate in the wintertime, that are not meant to stay there forever too. Like, not all of our buildings are meant to stay there forever. They're meant to deteriorate at some point. And then also using gray water systems, which people have been doing for ages and ages. That goes way back in ancient history, is reusing water. For example, like, you wash your hands and then that water goes to your toilet if you're using toilets, and then you pee in that toilet and then it goes somewhere else, either to your sewage or outside to a garden or somewhere where that waste, which isn't quite waste, waste isn't really, we think of waste as just being something to get rid of and then we never see it again. Nah, it stays there somewhere. It goes somewhere, and that waste, and you can use that waste over again. You can use them for your garden and for things like that. And those are some of my nature-based solutions that I want to share, and I'm super, super duper excited to have this panel with the rest of you guys. And I also think it's important for us to, as humans, to really put our intention into the future and really, like, close our eyes, close all this down, close the ears, close the eyes, and just, like, really intentionally think about, what is our future going to look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? Does it smell like frijoles that are being cooked up in the morning? Does it smell like your grandmother's clothes? Does it smell like spring water? Does it smell like good sweet water? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? And that's really, because before this earth was created, people would come, there's an in and out. People think the dimensions are just up, down, left, right, north, south, east, west. No, there's an in and out dimension where you can really shift reality, and you can really think about reality, and the reality will act in accordance the way of will be in accordance with your consciousness and your awareness. So I just wanted to drop that. It's like big but also small. I just want to pass it on to my next speaker. I want to thank you guys so much, humbly, for all the online folks that are watching and those will see this in the future. Many blessings to you guys soon in this next panel.
Esperanza, thank you. You couldn't see me behind the scenes, but I was just like snapping the whole time. Really echo a lot of what you shared, and especially like return to motherhood and what you shared about waste and how we really consciously can create our own realities. Just all around, yes. And so for our next speaker, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Brooke Cubby. Brooke Cubby is an avid hiker, caver, and nature lover. She has lived and traveled throughout what is currently known as Alaska, British Columbia, and the Southwest United States. After graduating high school from a small town in rural Arizona, she went on to earn a Bachelor's of Science in Geology from Arizona State University in 2018. She then worked as a cave guide and geology intern for the Tungus National Forest in Southeast Alaska before working as a natural resource management assistant at Coronado National Memorial in southern Arizona. In 2019, Brooke completed a solo hike of the Arizona Trail, which crosses the entire state of Arizona. Since 2016, she has participated in several protest marches and camps related to clean water and environmental justice, and is an active member of several local environmental and indigenous sovereignty activist organizations. She currently lives on the unceded lands of the Lower Tanana Dene people in what is now known as Fairbanks, where she is pursuing a Master's of Science in Geophysics from the University of Alaska. Without further ado, Brooke, welcome, and so excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much to the other speakers. I'm like really vibing with all of you, so thanks so much for being here and for speaking your truth. I go to school in Fairbanks, but right now I'm home for about a month. So I want to do a land acknowledgement for where I am right now. Right now, I am currently calling in from the stolen lands of the Tano Apache tribe in what is now a small ranching town called Payson, Arizona. And to go a little bit further into that, the Tono Apache tribe was forcibly removed from this land in the late 1800s and relocated twice. Eventually, they returned only to find that their home had been colonized by white settlers. And today, they live on an 85-acre reservation on the edge of town, which is the smallest land-based reservation in the state of Arizona. So when we're talking about nature-based solutions, forcibly removing traditional land stewards and completely changing the ecosystem is not where it's at. My first introduction to environmentalism and climate advocacy was when I was 20 years old. It was in 2016, and I went to Standing Rock. I did not really contribute much, and I wasn't there for long, but I learned a lot, and it really set the direction of completely re-educating myself. I went there as a very Eurocentric environmentalist, and I was just interested in clean water, but I left as an advocate for indigenous sovereignty. And over the years since then have developed a critical lens and eye to look out for the intersections of class, race, political power, land ownership, water access, food sovereignty, and clean air. It's all related. You can't separate this stuff. After Standing Rock, I met a bunch of other water protectors, and I went to a camp in Flint, Michigan. Also learned a lot there. And then I traveled to Pine Ridge and spent a lot of time with an Oglala Lakota family who taught me so much about what's what. Environmentalism and indigenous sovereignty are not separate things. You can't be an environmentalist and then like just learn about indigenous sovereignty on the side. They're inextricable. In the words of Francisco Chico Mendes, who was a Brazilian labor leader, socialist, and conservationist, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. And that kind of Eurocentric environmentalism that's focused on conservation, especially as it pertains to conserving wilderness, is a false concept and a false solution. It's empty because wilderness doesn't exist. Humans have been everywhere and have influenced everywhere. Nature is everywhere, and it is sacred everywhere, not just when it's in a national park. In terms of why non-native environmentalists should be teaming up with indigenous activists, I'm going to put some numbers in here. This is from Rebecca Nagel, who had a podcast called This Land. American Indian reservations hold an estimated 20% of oil and gas reserves in the United States. They also hold half of all uranium reserves and about a third of the coal that is west of the Mississippi. And that's just talking about federally recognized native lands. That's not including land that is not recognized by the current US government, but is still being cared for by native people. So, yeah. Well, I'm going really fast. Okay, I have time. So for those of us that are non-native, one thing to keep in mind in the United States is that Native Americans in this country are first and foremost a political group who have a different relationship to the US government than non-native people do. Indigeneity has become racialized. And so people think of it as a racial thing, but really a good way to think about it as it's a political thing. And it's become racialized through blood quantum and European notions about race. And this serves to dilute native political power and to continue colonization and genocide. Fundamentally, Native Americans are sovereign nations that have political agency and power. And when I was traveling through Mankato, I stumbled across an excellent line from a book that said something like, the US government has systematically turned independent nations into dependent ones. So to come back to nature-based solutions, the best nature-based solution for climate change is to keep existing carbon in the ground and in nature. And so this includes oil and coal, but carbon is also stored in limestone, which we use for concrete. It's also stored in forests, grasslands, tundra, and healthy soil. And so for keeping carbon in the ground and in nature, as we've seen with Standing Rock, the Tongass National Forest roadless roll, the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, proposed oil drilling, and pumping, blasting activity along the colonial wall that we know is the current US-Mexico border, we see that Native activists are on the front lines of environmental activism, always, everywhere, every time. And so their fight for sovereignty is actively keeping carbon stored in the ground, in the soil, and in the forests. So they have not only a political power with the US government, but also a deep knowledge and relationship with the land that greatly precedes the current political structures at play. And so for the benefit of all of us, those of us who are non-Native must support their sovereignty if we're talking about solutions to climate change. Indigenous sovereignty is environmentalism, and Indigenous sovereignty means keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. We have to support them because Native people make up only about 2.5% of the US population. We'll see what the new census has to say about that. And so those of us who are non-Native need to amplify their voices and support them, and support them. And the best way to start doing that is to listen and learn about what they have to say. Okay, I have a lot more to say, but not a whole lot of time. One concept that I wanted to introduce is called just transition, which I learned about through Native Movement, Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, and the Fireweek Collective. But I think that it comes from the Climate Justice Alliance. And that's the principle of transitioning out of an oil economy and an oil-based everything. And the key takeaway from that is transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so some principles from that are what the hands do, the heart learns. If it is the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. If we are not prepared to govern, we are not prepared to win. If it is not soulful, it is not strategic. And Indigenous wisdom shows us the path forward. So yeah, we have societies across the world which have lived in a sustainable way with their environment. I'm talking about Indigenous cultures that have survived for thousands of years and haven't set all their forests on fire and made all their water undrinkable and everything else. But not only have they sustained sustainable relationships with nature, they've many times created relationships that increase biodiversity and make the habitat more suitable for non-human beings as well. And I learned a lot about that from Robin Wall Kimmerer from Breeding Sweetgrass. So we should be listening to them, uplifting them, and trying to emulate the things that have worked for thousands of years and learning from them. We human beings are nature. Nature is everywhere. And so nature-based solutions means that we, and how we relate to the world and to each other, are the solution. Nature-based solutions means we are the solutions. Native people are the experts at being in good relationship with nature. And so we as non-Native people should support them, uplift them, and follow their lead. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brooke. I just am consistently amazed every single time I hear you speak. It's really so incredible to hear the intersection between STEM and environmental activism, because that's not one that gets too much attention a lot of the time, and I think is just so critically important if we are to really affect better environmental policies and just become better global citizens. So thank you. And I'd like to introduce our next and final speaker, Suzanne Zanny, as she likes to be called, Lacey. So Zanny's lifetime study of gardening and herbal medicine has led to the creation of Z Botanicals, herbal medicine and natural products. She is a massage therapist, shamanic Reiki master, nutritional counselor, and a yoga teacher. She makes her home in Vershire, Vermont at Zen Mountain Healing Center. And we can't wait to hear from you, Zanny.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody that spoke before me, and all your wisdom. I have so much in my heart. I'm so full. I am not an activist. I live a simple life. My connection is with the land and the plants and all the beings that I share here on this beautiful place I get to call home. I live on 150 acres of land that is just amazing. And I want to honor the ancestors that walked here before me. I live in Abenaki land, and I am eternally grateful for the life that I get to live. And listening to everybody speak, I really give gratitude to all the indigenous cultures, the fight that you've all, been living these many, many years since my ancestors came from Germany and Ireland and made their home here. And I know it's been a tough walk, and I just feel really deeply. But I want to talk about my nature-based solutions to climate change. And I believe here, living in this close connection with nature, working with the land, the compost, and the earth, the soil, all the plants. We keep bees here, so we have the pollinators. We work with the medicinal plants to make medicine. We work with the planets and the moon cycles when we plant and when we harvest. And in a minute, you're going to get a little view of the garden, the little tour of the garden in the summertime to see just how beautiful and how much gratitude that we have for this land where we live. So I've created a business called Z Botanicals and Hemp Company, where we've taken the medicine from the land here. We grow a lot of the plants, and we have mixed a lot of the properties of the plants with hemp, and have found that that combination has just increased the medicine. I feel that the sustainability of this land and the way we practice growing, harvesting, making medicine is the way that we are helping to support climate change by not supporting pharmaceutical drug companies. We have this connection not only with the plants, but with the planets and the energy. So it's like this full connection as we grow. And I don't know if the video can come up now for the garden tour. It'd be great to share that. That's just a little tour of the garden in the summer. And Z Botanicals harvests a lot of the herbs from this land. And what we can't harvest here, we source from other herbal companies that have the same kind of practices that we do. They harvest with gratitude and connection to the plants, whether they're wild harvesting or cultivating herbs like we do here. We do also do a lot of wild harvesting. One of the things that we really try to do in our business practice is to stay away from plastic as much as we can. And our footprint is very small in that area. We also recycle everything that we use, from tape to shipping materials, is made from recycled materials. So we're really trying to do our part. And as we grow, we are becoming a women's herbal collective to expand. And hopefully we're thinking of supporting third world country, women to get supplies like cacao and different herbs that grow in tropical places. And I just give great thanks for this life that I've chosen to live. And I give everybody else on this panel all the work that you're doing, the education, all the wisdom. I'm really honored. I was honored to be asked to be on this panel. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening and taking the time out of your day to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to have you on this panel as well, and to just hear, what a living example that you and Z Botanicals are of a company that's really kind of doing it right. And it serves as a great piece of inspiration to many of our viewers who might have businesses of their own, to think about how can they integrate. I know not everyone has a botanical company, but even just in the little things, in like maybe an office setting or anywhere really, how to ask the question, how can we better connect to the earth, and how can we make our practices more sustainable in general. So thank you for sharing your time with us. And thank you to all of our presenters for sharing just your infinite wisdom and being here with us today. I really feel that we had such an incredible array of voices and perspectives demonstrated. And we hope to, continue hearing from all of you, and wish you all the best in your endeavors going forward. So without further ado, I'd love to move into our Q&A section of the event. So if Vishal, we could get all of our panelists back up here with us, we'll be able to take some questions from the audience. Awesome. So ready for, perfect. First question. So question for Brooke from Rogers. We know that addressing climate change at times, we need both indigenous and scientific knowledge. How do we marry both processes to make the best out of our Mother Earth without leaving anyone behind?
That is a really great question. At University of Fairbanks, I took a class called Traditional Ecological Knowledge. Day one, we dropped the ecological out of it. So just focusing on traditional knowledge. And one of the main takeaways they had for us is that scientists will learn about traditional knowledge and they'll think, wow, that is so cool. I just want to grab that and put it into my work. I want to incorporate it. I want to integrate it. I want to take it in some way. And we were taught that that is not the way to go about it, that traditional knowledge is co-equal to science. I would even say in many cases, it's been more successful than science. So that's one example of ways not to do it. Scientists can't be taking traditional knowledge. The best example that I've seen was a scientist named Lydia Jennings, who is, I forget which tribe she's from, but she's from the Southwest. And she just finished her PhD, and it was on soil science. And she worked with the Tohono O'odham tribe to work on mining restoration sites. And so she was doing lab work, looking at the different microbes and composition of the soil and everything else, and applying that to the restoration. But she was also working with the tribes, or with the tribe, to hear what plants were most important to them, what restoration practices were most important to them, and how to do it in ways that worked for them. And so I think that was a really great example of having both science and traditional knowledge work together respectfully, and to come out quantifiably with a result that was highly effective at restoring the mining site. Hope that answered your question.
Awesome, thank you. In practical terms, Yodo from Cameroon asks, in practical terms, what is nature-based solutions? My second worry is the link between ecosystems, ecosystem services, and biodiversity when it comes to climate change impact. So does anyone feel called to answer the question or define nature-based solutions and what it means to you? Oh, I think Zanny, you're muted. I see you trying to talk a little.
I said I could speak to that. For me, it's just, and I know it's a way big, complex question, but in my own life, it's just to live simple and honor the earth. And we grow our own food. We know where our food comes from. So for me, that's how I would answer that question. Live a simple life, plant a garden, have something in your house that's alive, you know, that you can relate to, connect with.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'd say before answering the next question, just something I feel called to share about the last one is just really in any way possible, figuring out what part of the ecosystem that you're part of. So really identifying yourself not just as an individual outside of or kind of in control of the ecosystem, as more just like colonialist philosophy kind of entails. But really asking the questions of, okay, how am I part of the ecosystem? How can I be a better part of this ecosystem and give back to it rather than just depleting it or, just not being a good member and citizen. So I think if all of us can try to, play a little bit better of a role in the ecosystems that we're in, we'll have a lot better of a chance at a, equitable and hopefully sustainable future. So ready for the next question, unless anyone wants to follow up on that. Feel free to just like wave. No? Okay. So from Bharati Bhagat, what happens when boundaries set by local institutions are not enough? And Atya, I feel like that would be a great question for you. And just make sure to unmute if you want to answer.
I really didn't understand what the meaning of boundaries said, but if I understood well, if you want to set some limitations according to the local institutions, for example, in my case, in the wetland management, they set some limitations for fishing, or for example, in the agriculture sector. In some warmer seasons, they shift to some alternative livelihood rather than using the water resources from the wetland. So they can, for example, harvest the vegetation growing around the wetland for making some handicrafts and for selling in the urban areas. And that's the kind of limitations. For example, in some warmer seasons, they prevent from agriculture because the agriculture could decrease the amount of water resources from the wetlands. So they shift to some alternative livelihood during these warmer seasons, and the families living in the wetlands cooperate together, and they help each other to create some alternative livelihood options to decrease the pressure on the wetland, and at the same time they can increase their resilience against climate change. I hope that I can answer her question.
Awesome.
I feel like to add on to that, I feel like local institutions, it can be very tricky, it can be very tricky to kind of, I guess, like as a more like political or like a stronger, or what's not quite stronger, but more of like a U.S. colonial established power. It's very hard to let go and to let the local people or to have the local institutions take care of their own lands and stuff. It can be hard to let that power and that control go. But I think that I think that something that Atia was also speaking onto was that like people they know, hopefully they know, hopefully they know how to take care of of the fish that are there. It reminds me a lot about in what is so-called Canada, on Wet'suwet'en lands, that there's a lot of salmon there, that they, like, a lot of those folks out there are dependent upon salmon populations, and that they've been detrimentally, like, overfished. And this happens all over with any game, any plants, they've been overfished and overused. But I think it's like we said before, like, it's a lot about, like, asking the plants, like, really what is needed, having that connection to the land, but also, like, taking a step back and recognizing and really interrogating what does capitalism have to play in this. We really need to, like, as a society, we need to, like, step back and to ask these hard questions coherently, asking what is capitalism serving for us, and what should we keep and what do we not keep.
And sorry, I can add something else if I have time.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was working in the wetland and with the local people were more interested rather than governmental authorities to conserve the wetland and ecosystem services, because they depend on their livelihood, depend on the wetland resources. And we can define local institution in many different ways. For example, it is up to youth people, and it is up to NGOs to go through the local areas and remote areas which is vulnerable against the climate change, to find these local institutions, for example, some social behavioral among local people that can help in climate change adaptation, and they can include in the nature-based solution. And it is up to us to conduct some field research and go through the areas to find out what are local institutions that can be included in the decision-making process.
Absolutely. And I think that really underscores the importance of civil society in decision-making processes. So thinking, like, even within the UN system, or within just like current governance structures at the national levels, having that voice where citizens, where people on the ground who, have an intimate understanding of their ecosystems, of their, like, both environmental and social ecosystems, can better inform decision making. So rather than having this, like, top-down approach, like with, Reaganomics, you saw trickle-down economics didn't work. And it's like, it's just so much better when we're able to, allow people to lead from the ground up. And I think that that's really one of the key aspects of nature-based solutions, because it's our nature to be in community. It's our nature to be anchored to a place, not to, be thinking of things at this, like, kind of nebulous, massive level. Like, we need the wisdom that each one of us individually carries as part of, as being part of our own ecosystems, to better inform solutions going forward. So I see it as the more influence of not just local institutions, but local communities is, like, that's, I hope, the way that things go, if we're to, really just rectify a lot of what's happened over the years. So thank you all for sharing. And if no one has anything to add to that one, we can move into our next question. Anyone? Just give me, like, a wave if you want to speak up. Okay, we're good. Next question, Michelle, please. Thank you. So again, Rogers, in the African context, everything happens only through political will. How do we strengthen and ensure active engagement of the decision makers in addressing climate injustice? Ooh, this is a good one. Who wants to take it?
I'm a huge fan of direct action and hitting them where it hurts, which is their pockets. We know there's so much legislation right now to like criminalize like pipeline protests, and that's because pipeline protests work and it hurts them. And so if they're not going to listen to us asking nicely, then I think we need to ask not so nicely and vote with our dollars and with our bodies.
Yeah, it's very true. I think a lot of the injustices that are being perpetuated by governing structures as well, like it's totally because of the behind the scenes, like who's holding the strings behind it all, and it's just whoever is putting money into their pockets. So that's why I think like getting big money out of politics is so fundamentally important if we're ever going to have meaningful change. Because until that happens, like everything is going to be stunted by someone being like, actually, I have to continue polluting rivers with, my like non-point source pollutants. Like, sorry, I'm going to pump money to oppose this environmental legislation because I'm a big corporation that really just wants to continue profiting off of the destruction of local ecosystems. So I think until they can have, until they don't have a stake in politics, I think we're in trouble. And I saw Esperanza's hand go up. So
I myself speak from a very privileged standpoint, being a citizen here in the US, being light skinned, being, I've never had to migrate anywhere myself. My ancestors did, but I did not ever have to migrate. So I'm coming from a very privileged standpoint. And I think a lot of us in this panel might also come from a similar background as well. And in the terms of like, in terms of like other countries and things, we've seen it in Libya, we've seen it in Palestine, we see it in freaking Venezuela. We see like this, like a lot of this is literally like revolution, like mass movements of people like violently, with justifiably violent, going to the streets and having to like going to the streets and taking out their frustration and anger and trauma there, which happens a lot. And I think it's totally valid. I think it's valid that folks can do that and do it in that avenue. So I think a lot of it comes from like literally like mass movements, mobilization, striking. Like if you look at like Palestine or like Venezuela, like they've been doing this for like ever. If you look at like the it's hard for me to speak on to Africa too much because I'm not honestly, I have a better job to do, like having better connections with my African folks internationally. But speaking from like an America standpoint, like Venezuela and like there's a group called the EZLN, which is Emiliano Liberación Zapatista. Okay, it's basically about Emiliano Zapata, who's a very big leader in the Mexican-American War, and is just a political figure and things. But looking at those past histories of like mass movements, mass mobilizations, and like really like getting where you need to be, it's hard when we speak from a climate circle, when we're so privileged to say like, oh, we can just go out and strike like Greta Thunberg. We can just go out and strike and do these things and it'll work. No, other countries are not they don't play fair, So I think that I don't have the answers, but I think that a lot of these communities do. And yeah, there's an answer for you there. I don't have it. Thank you. And I think that Tony wanted to go next.
Yeah, thank you, Esperanza. I think I want to go off about some things. Like I think that when we talk about the political willingness of a system to change, or like politicians, like the decision makers to change, or like to bring a change about, it really varies, right? Like when it comes, I think it is very important to highlight that somebody going out to a demonstration in Washington D.C. does not exactly mean the same as doing that in Abuja, right? Or like as doing that in Lomé in Togo, or like in South Africa. Like it may just not be the same, right? In that things may just turn out in a different way. So I would never say, because the context can vary, I can never say, okay, you should go out and demonstrate, right? Because at times that also may mean that somebody's life will be at danger, right? I think that when it comes to like other type of solutions, I would say, it is important to take into account the cultural context, right? In many African countries, the cultural context is really connected to the elders, right? To community leaders, to community members, to specific groups. How are those specific groups represented at a national level, or like what type of influence do they have at parliament or in other political spheres? Can we get in touch with them, or like across communities, right? Being in many of those countries, very diverse when it comes to ethnicities and when it comes to identities. How can we come across those differences? How can we partner, right? How can we build a partnership? How can we build a connection? And how can we, bring something about? I think that is always very important. Um, and again, I'm also like not myself like all the way familiar with the African context, but I'm somewhat familiar with specific countries in the continent. So and again, it does vary from country to country, but I would say for sure, understanding and taking into account how is this country operating. I feel that for the African continent, for the Latin American region, for example, the issue of corruption, it is something that must be taken into account, right? How within a corrupt system, when it comes to how decisions are being made, how some people may be favored over others, because also when it comes down to climate resilience or like to climate change, you will see that in many of these regions, those who have the least are the ones who are the most affected by climate change, or like are the ones who are living at a place that will be probably covered by water, or like a place where air pollution is the worst, right? So how, like who are the people who are representing this group, like, and within itself, how is corruption playing a role? Like when we talk about politics, I think in certain contexts, we need to speak about this concept. How can I navigate the space? How can I bring about a change? And how is really the culture again of the people? Like, can we say, okay, we are living in a dictatorship, so then we should overthrow the dictator and then install a democracy? Like, do people know, how a democracy is going to work? Like, are people ready to make decisions on regular basis? Or like this type of questions really really play an important role in how decisions are made, but also like how climate action can be carried about in different contexts.
Absolutely. And I think that really, what you're sharing, Tony, really speaks to kind of the title of this conference series, the importance of localizing climate justice. So not just applying broad sweeping solutions to places where it might not be the right fit. So, taking into context, like, okay, here are some of these, proposed suggested solutions. How is that relevant in our local community? Like for my town in Pennsylvania that I live in, let's think about any given policy recommendation. How does that interact with the existing power dynamics? Who has power in this community? Who doesn't, more importantly? And how do we get those voices who don't have power to come to the table and discuss? How do we flip over the table, honestly? But I really think it is important to have that understanding of like, what are things like in the local context? So you're not just kind of trying to fit a circle into a square. And that way, solutions can be just more tailored and community driven rather than being something that's imposed. And to Esperanza's point, I just like totally resonate with like a lot of what you were sharing. And for, those of us who do have an enormous amount of privilege, I think that it's important to share that silence is violence, and that, when we are aware that something is unjust, like I come from a Jewish background and my partner's he's a Palestinian refugee, and I view my if I were silent on that situation to be something that just would be unacceptable. And so it's like the pain of the pain, hurt, and crimes against my people, they're all valid, they're all very real, but they don't justify perpetuating existing pain against another people. So I just wanted to like throw that out there. But I hear you, I appreciate you, and I do think that it's the job of those of us who do carry a lot of privilege when we walk through the world to make sure that we're using it for good.
That is like a little quick thing, that not all of us can be activists like the way that me and Tony are. Like not all of us can be like that. Like in places, I don't know where this gentleman was from, but like in other spaces, you will literally be killed for speaking your truth, for letting the truth come out. And I think that, like, as people say, like, injustice somewhere is injustice anywhere. It's true, and especially us where especially myself, who's comes from a United States perspective, somewhere, I have everything that I need, I have everything that I need. I could never want anything more. I have everything, every single privilege I want. I get to go to school. I get to speak my mind like this, But other places, it's not the reality. It's not the reality at all. People are political prisoners. There are violence. There's threats that are put on people, And it's really, I think I take a lot of courage and I take a lot of inspiration from those behind me, from the people, from the other histories and the other legacies that have been left for me to pick up this stick and keep walking with it, So I think that I would give that answer again, like just look at your past and see what can be done, and it'll never be the same. This time, this age, this era of a pandemic, of technology, of climate change will never be the same anywhere else, So I think that I would look to our past in order to see better in order to clear our view for going forward.
Well, and we're really in a moment here in history where we have this opportunity. We have this connectivity to reach so many people, and it has to be from the ground up. It has to be each individual understanding their feeling towards the planet and what we need to do to take care of it, and they all have to come to that realization within their own heart that the earth is sacred and that it needs to be honored and cared for. And the educating people of that is one of the major things that we can do to help the process along. Because as long as people are caught up in their their screens and their all these distractions, they're not paying attention, and so all of the people in power can do whatever they want. But the more people that start to pay attention to the issues and start to take whatever even small little actions they can on their own, are going to start building this bigger and bigger wave that will eventually, hopefully, be able to sweep across and actually get some of what we're trying to do done here.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I think we'll take probably like one or two more questions to discuss. This has been like an awesome discussion so far, so thank you all. All right, this question is, nature-based solutions, plant-based diets based on syntropic farming approaches solve almost all problems at the same time. Not really a question, but a comment that we can definitely discuss if you guys want to discuss it. I personally am predominantly plant-based and have found that that's really healing, and I know that that's an enormous privilege to be able to eat a fully plant-based diet, but I think that there's also something to be said for eating as much local food as you can, if that's possible, both just based on where you are and financially as well. Feel free to wave.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of the conclusion that I've been coming to lately, is that a lot of climate change relates back to the ways that we do agriculture. People kind of freak out about deforestation in the Amazon without asking why it's happening. And a lot of the reason why it's happening has to do with agriculture. And from just really basic ecology in terms of energy moving through an ecosystem, it's way more efficient for us to be plant-based. I would also say that the optimal diet is really dependent on where you live, for a lot of reasons. And there's also a cultural component that I think a lot of European descendant vegans forget about, which I've learned about in Alaska. A lot of Native people there have been attacked for their lifestyles of hunting because it's viewed as violent or barbaric in some way. So plant-based is super good, but beyond plant-based, it's the relationship that we have with food and the environment, and being conscious of that wherever is local to us.
Yeah, I'm sure, Aaron, I know you both raise your own.
We tend to we grow as much food as we can ourselves. We raise chickens. We have a community of homesteaders in town that some people raise pigs, some people raise cows, and it's all local, sustainable permaculture. And to add on to what Brooke said, it's not only the culture that some people eat meat. There's also body types, and there's different people have different things going on in their body, which that sometimes a meat-based diet can be quite beneficial to. But it's not about the factory farms or that. You need to, again, I go back to the same thing. You need to be in a relationship. If I'm going to eat chicken, then I have to be in a relationship with this chicken and honor its life, and then, you know, do it in a sacred, honorable way. I'm not going to just. I obviously I've lived a long life, and there have been times when I've eaten food, you know, not up the mountain. But the more and more I can learn to grow food and make it as sustainable as possible through that process, the better, because it makes me feel better. It not only in my mind, but my body feels healthier. Everything about the whole process has this high vibration, as opposed to, you know, the factory farm where the chicken is, you know, lives in a tiny little cage and has a miserable life, and then it dies, and then, you know, all that fear and pain and anguish goes into the food, the vibration of the food. If we're raising our animals in a loving, sacred way, then there's a better vibration in that food. That's simply what my experience has been. And yes, the tearing down the Amazon and putting in farms and raising cattle or planting these unsustainable fields of things is a horrible thing, and it's not sustainable in any way, shape, or form.
I think that also really ties in, you know, thinking about ecosystem services and thinking about nature-based solutions. You know, what we view, and by we, like our societal governing structures, what we view as having value and how we define value. So if you think about the way that we measure success in the current model, like countries measure success by GDP, which is gross domestic product. Nowhere in that framework is there room for human well-being, is there room for environmental well-being, for the well-being of others. And it doesn't factor in all that, you know, all that trees give to us. It doesn't factor in all that clean water gives to us. And, you know, all that it is in and of itself, because it doesn't have to just be valued in relation to us. So I think that there's a big shift that needs to happen in our societies as a whole, and just in us as individuals even, because there's many people who aren't as conscious, I would say, as the wonderful humans who are sitting here on this panel. And I think that, you know, there's a big just gap in how we view ourselves relative to everything else. And so I'd say it starts with that shift in consciousness to understand, like, okay, why do we need to value the Amazon? Do we need to value it because it helps us survive, or do we need to value it because it is a sovereign thing in and of itself, that a sovereign being in and of itself that you know, deserves to thrive? So it's a fascinating, you know, dichotomy that I wish we had like all the time in the world to chat about this, but maybe we can have like a Zoom party offline and discuss it.
I have one more thing, Nadine.
Yeah.
So in the history of the world, you know, it's always been the elders of the community that have been the ones to gather the knowledge through their life and then pass it down to the generations that come after them. And if you have studied nature, the same thing happens in the forest. If you have an ancient giant tree, then all the trees that grow around that old, you know, 500-600 year tree, all the trees in the forest near that tree are getting their knowledge or their energy or whatever. It's a symbiotic relationship, and so they get that from the ancient tree. And if we go in and we cut down the big ancient tree and pull that out and build tables or build houses or whatever with that ancient tree, we're left with all these saplings that don't have the sacred knowledge of the earth. They're just trees. And the same thing happens with humans. If we take all the elders out and put them in nursing homes and don't, you know, they get full up on chemical drugs or whatever, you know, has caused the lack of knowledge to be carried on, then we end up with people growing up without the knowledge that's being passed down, and we stand there saying, well, what are we supposed to do? And I really have to compliment all these the people here on the panel, and hopefully a lot of people who have tuned in to watch this, because it's the young generation, it's you people who are really starting to take the reins of this, and hopefully as it goes on, you'll learn, you'll grow, and then be able to pass this on to the people, to the young kids. I mean, I have 15 8 to 12-year-olds that I teach martial arts to, and just giving them that experience and teaching them to love the earth and to be based in nature is going to really serve them as they go out and they start doing this kind of activism. And so we need to remember that the elders, that we can't lose that. There still are some elders out there, and we need to honor them and look to them and kind of get whatever information we can from them, because it's vitally important for all of us as we move forward.
Mm. Thank you for that. We can all try our best to be good elders.
Really quick. If you're really interested in this, I'll look up Dr. Sebi. He's this really cool African healer on YouTube. He does a lot of lectures and stuff. If you're into that food things, yeah.
Perfect. And I think we have time for one more question. So if Vishal, you want to hit us with another question, that'd be great. Thank you. So for all panelists, 1 minute each, if there was one nature-based solution or theory you could implement right now globally, what would it be? And how could we develop this solution and localize it in a just and equitable fashion? I'll take a picture of that one so I have it when it goes away. And feel free to take time and just kind of like speak whenever you feel moved.
Okay, so I guess I can start. The one thing I would say is for each and every individual to go outside, find a tree or a forest or a rock or something, and sit there and just do some deep breathing, get into the present moment, sit with the plants and the animals, and really just try and connect to the earth itself. That's what every one of us really needs to do. Put your bare feet on the ground and just absorb that vibration and see if it can create that shift in you. Everyone needs it, and it would just be a wonderful thing.
I would like to agree with that. And also, as much time in nature. We're so disconnected, you know, like be out there all the time. Obviously, it's winter here where we live, but try to get out. I try to get out every day and just breathe in the air, and like at night, look up at the moon with Saturn and Jupiter right there now, and connect with that energy. We are of the earth. We're not separate. We've gotten so disconnected with our connection. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'll go ahead. Going back to food. So to me, nature-based solutions talking about climate change, immediately the root cause issue of climate change is this disequilibrium that extractive societies have with the natural world. But like from a scientific perspective, it's an excess of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so quite simply, a solution to that would be to take that carbon out of the atmosphere and into the earth, water, or vegetation. And so if there's one thing I could implement right now globally, it would be food sovereignty, which would be local and would mean that people could produce foods in ways that sequestered carbon.
I'll go ahead and say that like one thing that I think could be done at an individual level would be to find a cause that you really care about and really fight for that. Like really connect to the people, really inform yourself about the cause, about how that is affecting you or like affecting other people, whose voices are being heard, whose voices are not being heard, what identity you hold, what privilege you hold. Because I think that it is true that there is a lack of connection to nature, but I also think there is a really, really big disconnect to one another, like to another individual, to another human being. And I think that if it may be more difficult for you to have that access to nature or like to a natural landscape or like environment, I would say try to get that, that connection with somebody else. I mean, of course, I'm not speaking like physically go there, right? There's COVID, but I'm saying just like to find really that cause that you care about or that you would like to really give your time to. And with that too, I would say give your time out. Many people think it is about money, it is about about other things, but I think at the end of the day, it is really about the time and the quality of time that you give out to you, to yourself, or like to other people.
Oh, Atya, you're still muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think I will be the final one, but I'm not the final one. I was thinking that maybe we can provide some opportunities for governmental authorities to go in the local areas and speak with the local people. Maybe it is not directly related to nature-based solutions, but we have to create this connection between governmental authorities and governmental experts who are dealing with decision-making process to listen to the local people and to listen to their voices, and maybe they can include their insights in the decision-making process. And I think that it is up to youth and it is up to NGOs to work in the local areas and especially in the remote areas, which is vulnerable against climate change, and try to find out what are the nature-based solutions, and try to bring up their voices in the tables for policy making. We need to fill this gap between governmental authorities who are dealing with decision-making process and the local people, and it is up to everyone, and especially youth people, to make the future generation a better place for all of the human beings.
I love this lady. She's good, y'all. Follow her work. She's good. You can tell. You can tell. She got some good work going on. I think when I heard this question, I feel like my mind straight went to like, what if we began to see water as being a relative and not just an element, and not just as a resource, but as a living, breathing family member of ours? And I think that a lot of the other panelists had also touched on this as well. I think if I were to, just right in this moment right now, I think I'd have like a global shift to seeing all around us as being a relative, and all around us having, of us being the same, made of the same minerals, liquids, and elements of each other. Like I also keep chickens, and I'm always thinking like, dang, like sometimes I'm scared of them sometimes, and I take a moment and be like, okay, we're made up of the same elements, liquids, minerals. We're the same thing. We're made up of the same thing as the clouds and the waterways and the fish and all the stones and boulders. So I think I would have like a global shift paradigm to seeing the world as being a relative, as a family member.
I love that. And I really just want to echo and just yes to everything that everyone shared. I think collectively, if we could implement all of our 1-minute solutions, we'd be in a much better place. And I think for me, my thing that I would like to implement, if possible, would be shifting how our leadership structures work and ensuring that at all levels of governance, you have civil society and local voices represented, and not just represented in a technocratic way, but in a way where their words have impact and their words have influence over how things are governed, and especially with indigenous populations all over the globe, not just in the US context, ensuring that there's space not even just in the climate discourse, but across policymaking, for that just critical perspective to weave its way back into our systems of governance, and to help realign us, because we, like, Lord knows we need it. So I think, yeah, for me, it'd be just really altering the way that we have representation in every single level of governance.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you to everyone who just gave these 1-minute solutions. This was an enlightening exercise, and I've sort of seen, like Nadine was talking, if we had all of these 1-minute solutions clumped together, I think the world would be a much better place. But to sort of add on to that, I think my solution would go back to what Tony was talking about in his presentation, which I find to be fixing educational curriculum, not even changing or modifying educational curriculum globally, but fixing it, because it is broken currently. As a student, I know Tony's a student, Esperanza as well. We're all lifelong students, of course, but seeing and sort of growing up using textbooks and literature and reading materials that just is full of blatant lies, and it's full of blatant misinformation and even disinformation at times. It's quite eye-opening to see how your perception of historical issues changes with time. And I think that fixing educational curriculum to include Indigenous voices is the first step to what Nadine was saying, including Indigenous voices in policymaking. And of course, we can't wait. So this needs to happen now, and it needs to happen about 200 years ago. But we have to use what we have right now and make a difference. So I think my solution and all of our solutions together are collectively towards building a just society first. And once we have that just society where everyone has an equal say and everyone's issues are taken with equal importance, and I think we're on the right track. But thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. I'm going to remove our speakers from the chat now, and we'll just hear from Nadine a little more about the GYCAD and revision process, and I will take over after, and we will go ahead and end the stream there.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our amazing panelists, and all the, just like, thank you to Vishal for all the amazing tech help behind the scenes. This whole method of presentation would not have been possible without him and his just like wizardry, honestly. So I would like to formally transition into our revision process period. In the comments of the YouTube Live and Facebook Live, there should be links to the Zoom or actually, if you look at the bottom of this, the scroll bar, you can do bit.ly/GYCAD nature-based. And that will take you to the Zoom where we can just chat about the nature-based solutions section of the document, and hear everyone's input. But I'd love really quickly before we bounce into the Zoom, if the panelists are all still part of the thing, to just like get everyone back on and do like one little wave or smile, or I don't know if okay, so yep, here we go. We might have, we got Tony back. Yay, Tony. So maybe if the cameras work, we can do like if everyone's comfortable, like a just little team photo. I'll crop.
We lost Tony, but that's all right.
Square in. I took a couple screen grabs during the thing because it's sneaky.
Yes, and that's a great point. We will be distributing this recording after the fact. One of the most important parts of this conference series is not just the attendance and live events, because we know, especially during COVID, how difficult it is to find a couple of hours to sit down and watch an event and sit in front of a computer and a screen for more time than you already are in your work and school and whatnot. So the majority of interactions we get on these events are from those watching the recordings. And this isn't just a live event, this is chronicling this discussion, and we're setting this discussion down in history to use as a future template for discussions about nature-based solutions. And we will be using this in promotional material. We'll be sharing this along with the document with policymakers across the globe. So a big thank you to all of our speakers. Again, I've been given so much to think about, from just the intersection between STEM and environmental activism from Brooke. You brought up some really fantastic points, and of course, Indigenous activism from Esperanza and Tony, and global environmental ecosystem work from Atiye, intersection with law, and Aaron and Zanny for your US-based nature living, and of course Nadine for leading the trail for youth across the globe in the climate. But again, a massive thank you to all of you. We'll follow up with the details. We'll share all of the information on our website, gycad.org. Join us in the breakout rooms and the Zoom links below. Those will begin in approximately 5 minutes. Come and chat with us, talk about the document, and stay tuned on our social media and website for future events. Thank you all so much.
If we can get over in 3, 2, 1, we'll smile. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
I think Tony's back, by the way.
Oh, is he? If we can
I
bump
think
him to the video.
Welcome back,
Yeah.
Tony.
Okay, perfect. Ready? So we're gonna do that again. 3, 2, 1. Esperanza.
Beautiful.
All right. Thank you all.
Stay safe.
Wonderful getting to connect with everyone. Please keep in touch.